thanks so much for joining me for this live webinar today. We're going to be tackling a challenge that every fundraiser comes up against at some point: how to secure funding for those essential core costs that are crucial to keeping your organisations running, but they're really often overlooked by funders. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to explore practical strategies to help you reframe your core costs into fundable, outcome-driven projects so you can continue delivering the impact your community depends on. All of these strategies are designed to help you make your case more compelling, more strategic, and more fundable in today's really competitive trust landscape. So before we get started, just in case some of you have joined us from the Facebook Hub and don't know who Money Tree Fundraising are, and that's the organisation that's running this webinar today, I just wanted to give you a quick overview. For more than 14 years, Money Tree Fundraising has been supporting organisations just like yours to secure the income they need to thrive through strategic, donor-focused trust fundraising, major donor fundraising and capital appeals. We work with fundraisers like you across the UK, delivering training, consultancy and practical support. If you're interested in finding out any more about our services, there'll be some links at the end of this presentation. Please do reach out and we can explore how to work together. And who am I? Well, I'm Stacey and I've been working in fundraising for 20 years. Goodness me, can't believe that it's 20 years, many of those as a trust fundraiser. I'm now a trust fundraising consultant with Money Tree Fundraising, and I help organisations like yours access high value funding from trusts. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some of my insight and experience over the last 20 years to help you today. So the challenge of rising core costs. As you'll know all too well, charities are facing growing financial pressure, rising core costs from increasing staff wages and national insurance costs to utility bills, and that's stretching your budgets more than ever. And I know a lot of trust fundraisers are being asked to pick up that cost through trusts. It's not always the most efficient way, as we know. Traditionally, trusts do like the projects. They do want those projects, but there are ways that we can reframe our core costs into projects to help us to when we've got those people on our shoulders saying, can you find us some core costs, please? We can try and build those into. Trusts and foundations are receiving more applications than ever before, and it's becoming increasingly competitive to try and get that funding. But like I said, lots of funders still prefer to fund projects, something that's specific and really tangible, rather than the core costs that actually make all our amazing projects possible. So how do we bridge that gap? How can we reframe our essential running costs in a way that funders can engage and support? That's exactly what we're going to explore today. So I thought what we'll do is start by having a look at the kind of current-ish trust fundraising landscape. We all know how it feels out there, but these are the actual kind of things that have been pulled together to show us what's happening out there. Trust fundraising is always evolving, and that's been no different over the last few years. I've seen lots of different changes come to the trust fundraising landscape over the last 20 years. It's really important to stay informed about shifts in that landscape so you can amend your own trust fundraising strategies and look ahead to changes on the horizon. This really helps you stay more competitive, and because this could be a really challenging sector to work in. Trusts and foundations continue to play a vital role in supporting your charitable organisations, but as part of a diverse income mix. In 2023, UK grant makers gave away 23 billion, and although it doesn't feel like it, that's a 7% increase on the previous year, while trusts and foundations alone increased their giving by 12% to 8.2 billion. Just 28% of the value of grants to charities with a registered address in London were to organisations that operate in London only. Sometimes it feels like all the London charities are getting all of the grants, but actually that's not the case. The majority of funds to London organisations were to charities operating nationally or internationally, so they had their head office in London. And you won't be surprised to learn that national lottery distributors awarded grants totaling over 2.4 billion. They're a huge player in the trust landscape. Trusts and foundations have overtaken government bodies as the largest source of grant income to the voluntary and community sector. Now, personally, I think this is a reflection of the government and local council cuts that we've probably all been seeing in our organisations. Those council contracts aren't out there as much for us to go for. And those, sorry, just let somebody in through my train of thought of. So yeah, those council contracts aren't out there for us to go for, and those little pots of money that used to be available for grants also have dwindled and dwindled, which has now made that, you know, trust and grants are giving more money to organisations like ours than local government bodies. But of course, as you know, the sector is also facing significant challenges. We've seen a cost of living crisis, a surge in demand for our services, rising operational costs, and ongoing political instability that really does have and make a difference to what's going on in the world of charities. The trust fundraising landscape has become increasingly competitive, with it being reported that there's a 20 to 30% increase in applications, if not more. I'm sure we would all say that it's more. As a result, some funders are reframing their strategies, and a small number have paused or even closed their programs. Now, I know that when you're on the ground trying to raise funds, it can feel like this is happening everywhere. But here's a helpful reminder. These closures still represent less than 5% of all trust funders, so there is absolutely still opportunity out there. These changes just mean your application needs to be really well researched, really well structured, and aligned with your potential supporters' priorities. Scattergun approaches in this landscape really just will not work. You're not just applying, you're showing how your work helps them achieve their mission and vision. So that's all things just to bear in mind as we go through the slides today. So now that we've looked at that wider landscape of trust fundraising and the challenges that many of us are facing, let's shift perspective for a moment and look at what's going on in the mind of the funder. Understanding funder psychology is one of the most powerful tools we have. When we understand their motivations and hesitations, we can then speak their language and shape our core costs in a way that resonates. Fundraisers often assume that funders simply don't like core costs, but actually the reality is more nuanced. First, there's a concern about control. Funders want to feel confident that their money is making a tangible difference. If a budget line looks like it's covering admin, IT support, or rent, they worry the impact is indirect or even invisible, so they won't be making the difference that they want to. Then there's the fear of dependency. Some funders don't want to cover salaries or operational costs every year. They're looking for sustainable, one-time investments that, rather than open-ended support, or feel like they have to commit to giving those ongoing support, because otherwise your projects won't keep going and the money that they've put in year one won't feel like it's going to go anywhere. Finally, there's often an unclear connection to outcomes. Funders want to see impact, but sometimes we fail to show how these behind the scenes costs directly enable that impact. So the good news is, once we understand this mindset, we can start to reframe core costs as critical enablers of the change we all want to see. That's what the next few sections is going to be about. So, how do we respond to those funder concerns and present our core costs in a way that makes them feel not just accessible, but essential? There are a few powerful shifts that you can make. So think of your core costs and reframe them as critical enablers. Rather than listing them as admin or operations, describe how they make your work happen. For example, project management isn't just a salary, it's the driving force that keeps service delivery smooth, effective, and timely. It's what ensures that people and beneficiaries you support actually get what they need when they need it. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But sometimes thinking about those costs in that way can put you in a different mindset, which means when you're talking to funders, you can reframe things differently. Secondly, use language that resonates with the funders. Words really do matter. While some funders still use the phrase core costs, we see this a lot when we're told that we can't go for core costs. Many are starting to think of it as infrastructure, capacity building, or scaling impact. Infrastructure is something that we're starting to use a lot more in the charity world. I know when the organisation I worked in before, we were talking about volunteer infrastructure, and we were talking about helping other charities build infrastructure. It used to be that was a term that was used when you were thinking about building roads and things like that, but actually it's something that's coming up more and more in the charity sector too. I think these terms sound more strategic and more future focused. So, for example, rather than saying I need £10,000 for salaries, you might say £10,000 would strengthen our ability to deliver responsive, high impact support. So you can see the difference that we're starting to try and build to get our funders or potential funders to think differently about what we're presenting to them. And then thirdly, show sustainability. Funders don't want to feel like they're a sticking plaster. They want to invest in something that's lasting. They want their funding to have a legacy and a purpose and a meaning rather than just a one-year, one-off thing. Make it clear that their support will help you build long-term capacity or safeguard essential services, and it's not just a temporary plug for a gap. Let's have a look at an example. So instead of saying we need £50,000 for project management, you could say with £50,000 we can support 500 more individuals this year, thanks to a project team that ensures effective service coordination, personalised support and a consistent experience for every person we help. So again, you see the change in just thinking about it slightly differently. This kind of framing links operational costs that we know are harder to fund directly to your outcomes, speaking the funder's language and tapping into their desire to fund measurable impact, meaningful impact. These are really small but powerful shifts, and it's a different way of thinking about how we present these core costs, and it can make the difference between a declined application and a really well-funded project. So I'm just going to pause for a second. So we've had a couple of people rejoin us. I am recording the session, but don't worry, it's just for us to go back over later, so you don't have to scribble to make lots of notes now. But because there's so few of us today, if you have any questions as we're going through, please do pop it in the chat. Put your hand up if you're feeling brave, put your microphone in and video back on and ask any questions that you have. Sometimes you have that burning question that you want to get out straight away, but there will be time for Q&A at the end, so you won't have missed your opportunity if you're not feeling brave. Okay, we'll carry on. Thanks for that, everyone. So, how do we take the idea of core costs and make them feel fundable? As we've discussed, many funders still view things like admin or salaries as overheads. Essential, yes, probably more to us, but not particularly exciting, sexy, or impactful. That's why it's so important we shift the framing. One effective approach is to present these costs as essential components of delivering your impact. So this is what we've been talking about, but here are some examples. Instead of admin staff salaries, you might talk about our frontline coordination team, ensuring every individual receives timely, consistent support. Rather than utilities, say keeping our community centre open, warm and safe for vulnerable people, or whatever it is that you're doing, keeping it open and warm and safe. And instead of covering core operational costs, explain that you're strengthening the infrastructure behind our frontline services so we can respond faster, reach further and do more. This kind of reframing aligns better with the funder's priorities, and it also gives you more space to tell stories. Because once these costs are part of your project narrative, you can build around them like you would do any project. You can share data, you can share case studies, stories and outcomes that illustrate how your whole service works together to create change. To put really simply, your organisation can't deliver impact without these enablers. And if you can connect those dots for your funders, you make your ask much more persuasive. So we're going to have a quick power pause. These are just a chance for you to catch up on everything that we've just talked about, quickly make some notes, or what I've tried to do is pick out key things that I think will resonate with you and resonate with you afterwards when you're looking back through your notes. So I think the one key takeaway that is important to remember is that adding in core costs as part of your project, or looking at them as part of your project, isn't about changing the project. It's about rethinking how you communicate the need. Your project will remain the same, but the way you present it can make all the difference when you're applying for funding. It's all about taking those core cost elements and showing how essential they are to your project, so you can present them as project costs rather than just as pure overheads. And I think that's the shift that we need to make. We're so worried about presenting something that a funder wouldn't fund. Sometimes we forget that actually we can fold those core costs into our project if we're clever and we use these techniques. So they're not core costs, they're project costs. Let's have a look at some more examples, because I know this can be, especially when you're listening to someone talking, it can be complex to figure out how you would do this for your own organisation. So let's walk through a simple hypothetical example. So imagine an organisation applying for funding to cover core staffing costs. Instead of asking for salaries or admin support, they present the need as funding for a specialist support team, a group dedicated to delivering targeted interventions, whether that's mental health support, mentoring, crisis care, whatever it is that your organisation might do. In their application, they don't focus on the cost, they focus on the impact of that team. They talk about how it ensures people get timely, expert support during critical moments. They share real life stories of individuals who've benefited, and they anchor it with clear, measurable outcomes, like delivering 3,000 hours of specialist support annually, or helping 200 people move from crisis to stability. It's putting those real life key stats and impact outcomes in that really anchors those core costs into your deliverable project. Because it's framed as a defined mission-driven project with those outcomes and impacts, they can also roll in other essential costs like utilities to keep their centres open, IT systems to help with service delivery, or even ongoing training to keep their teams skilled and responsive. This is a great example of how reframing core costs as part of a larger outcomes-driven project can make those unsexy expenses feel vital, fundable, and totally aligned with the funder's priorities. So I hope that's starting to make some sense how we think about things differently. Let's look at a tougher example, something that funders often push back on, and that's IT infrastructure. Most of us know that if we were asking for £25,000 for IT systems and tech support, it would be a really tough sell. We'd get a lot of pushback because it sounds like a back office cost. But what if we reframe that as an essential enabler of your mission? So instead of saying we need £25,000 for IT, you might say reaching more people faster, how tech is unlocking access to life-changing support. This reframe project could highlight how outdated systems are slowing down referrals, preventing your team from coordinating effectively, or making it harder to monitor outcomes that then go on to providing further benefits and impact, because you can change what you're doing to those beneficiaries. Then show how an upgraded system would allow your team to respond more quickly, personalised support, manage safeguarding and risk more effectively. And just like with frontline delivery, you can tell stories. Maybe there was a family that was left waiting days because of referral delays because your IT system was out of date, or a young person in crisis was supported just in time thanks to a real-time system alert. You're taking something unglamorous and showing how it translates into faster support, better outcomes, and ultimately lives changed. That's what you're all about with the work that you're doing. This is the core message here. Even costs like IT can become compelling fundable projects where you tell the story well and connect the dots between infrastructure and real world impact. So it's thinking about those core costs and making sure that you can really demonstrate, with those case for support, your stories, your outputs, that impact, the real impact that those funders will have on your overall project and therefore the beneficiaries. So I hope that all makes sense as we move on to the next section. So there's a lot to think about there, isn't there? So as you start reframing core costs into fundable projects, there are 3 key strategies that I always keep in mind. First, focus on that impact. Rather than presenting costs as admin expenses, think about what those costs enable you to provide and the difference they make for the people you support. Funders want to see clear objectives, measurable outputs and defined outcomes. So make sure you know and are able to show the real world impact of these costs. What will those costs enable you to do for your beneficiaries? Then I always ask myself, if I wasn't here, if our organisation wasn't here, because you can't find the funding for these core costs, what would happen? What would happen if your organisation couldn't continue providing the essential care that you provide, the monitoring that you provide, the mentoring that you provide? I think this is a really powerful way to think about how core costs are vital to your organisation and how they can fit into your projects. It enables you to frame urgency into your applications and demonstrate why funders should invest in your project. Why should they do that right now? It's something that I've started really focusing on now, as it's so competitive out there, as we all know, and I think it really helps you get in that mindset. If we don't get these core costs, my CEO, my line manager is asking me to try and find some of these core costs. What would happen to the services that we're delivering if we can't do this? And another good way to look at this is to look at core costs as a cost per head approach. So break your budget down, including your core costs, because this helps make your funding requests more tangible and adaptable. So if your project costs £10 per person, you could ask for £1,000 to support 100 people or £5,000 to support 500. This allows you to tailor your ask to fit within a funder's funding envelope while still maintaining the integrity of your project, because you're bundling up those core costs into a cost per head. I've used this technique quite a lot recently, where some of the core costs that we had, some of those overhead costs were quite high, but actually when you added them into the overall cost of the organisation, the cost per head wasn't that big. So you could start seeing, actually, for a funder, if it costs me £10 to help one person, this is how much my funding will give, and this is how much I can do, this is how many people that I can fund. So that's a really good way of kind of hiding your core costs without having to speak about them outwardly, especially if you're just doing a 2-page proposal and you're not filling in an application form that requires you to put in a full budget. You don't always put your full budget into a 2-page proposal, depending on what you're asking for. So that's another good way of looking at it. I think by using these strategies, you can start to think about how you can approach integrating core costs into your fundable projects. It's just a really good place to start, and it gives you 3 things to look at if you're presented with a core cost and then need to start thinking about how to reframe it. So we're going to take a moment to pause and reflect on what we've just learned. There's a couple of these pause and reflect moments. It's just a chance for us to catch our breath, have a little drink, scribble down our notes, but also I want to give you a really short task to do. So pick one core cost from your organisation, something that you know your organisation needs right now but is really hard to fund. Then, based on everything we've discussed so far, how could you reframe that into a fundable project? Can you give it a compelling title? Can you describe the outcomes a funder would care about? So, for example, if you're struggling to fund an organisation's rent, you might reframe it as part of a wider project called a safe base for support, showing how this space enables you to provide crisis advice, mentoring, counselling, community support, all under one roof, whatever it is that you do. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to think about this. You don't have to have a full answer now. It's just something to get your brain working in the way that we've been talking about. So think about something: staff training, rent, utilities, whatever it is that you know your organisation is struggling to fund. And then think about how you'd pitch this to a funder. What difference does it make and who does it help? So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to have a think about that one. I'm going to have a quick drink because I've been doing a lot of talking. Again, if anybody's got any questions at this point, please do pop your hand out or pop them in the chat, and we can pick anything up at this point. But I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes headspace to just think about everything we've talked about so far. Okay, does everyone feel happy? Did that feel good to do that task, to just start thinking about things? Because I know sometimes when you come to these webinars, you get ideas. I think that's the best thing about webinars sometimes, is just having that headspace to think about things differently. And sometimes you want to get straight on in and make that difference straight away and start getting your kind of ideas down straight away. So I hope that just gave you a moment to just pause and think, and start putting some of these things into place. So if we're all ready, we'll carry on. So we've talked about how to reposition call costs, but what about the common mistakes that can trip us up when we're trying to do this? Even with the best intentions, certain wording choices or gaps in information can really weaken our applications and make a funder hesitate to look any further, to see through what we've done with call costs. We're going to go through a few pitfalls to watch out for and how to avoid them, because often it's just a small tweak in language or structure that can make all the difference between a rejection and a successful grant. So mistake one that I see quite often is being too generic. Funders want to clearly understand the connection between their funding and the real world impact it will create in your organisation. A vague request like "we need admin support" sounds like an overhead with no impact. So instead, we're going to paint that vivid picture. You could reframe it as helping young people access emergency advice and support through expert case coordination. So it's admin, but it's looking at it a different way. This helps to tell a story about the value of the work behind the scenes, all those people that don't often get to be front and centre, or we have to really kind of hide behind everything that we're doing. Mistake two, another mistake I see quite often, is not defining those outcomes enough. It's not enough to just say we need funding for training or we need funding for outreach. Funders need specific. So instead, try "this funding will allow us to deliver 200 hours of skilled training for care leavers, helping them transition into work or further education." It's clear, it's a measurable outcome, and it can build confidence that your project is focused and fundable. It lets a potential funder know that you know what you're talking about. You've thought about these things. You know what you want to achieve with their support. And then again, mistake three is failing to create that urgency. Funders are juggling a lot of requests, especially at the moment. And if your project doesn't feel timely or urgent, it can often get deprioritized. Instead of saying "we need funding for a youth mentoring program," you could say "without your support, we won't be able to match 100 vulnerable people with trusted mentors before the holidays, a critical period for isolation and risk." By avoiding all these common pitfalls and reframing your request with clarity, urgency and impact, your core cost funding needs become more than just visible. They become compelling. They become that you're letting the funder know we can't do it without them. So let's take a look at how you can use all this knowledge to try and craft a fundable project. Turning call costs into fundable projects, I think, requires a structured process to help you keep on track. But maybe this is just the way that my brain works. I am a box ticker. On the screen, you'll see some key components that you need to craft a fundable project. We're going to break these down one by one in a moment, so don't worry about rushing to write all these down now. You'll have a chance in a minute, but I will just run through what these key components are. So one is to identify those core costs. Two is to break your costs down into activities. Three is to focus on outcomes and impacts. Four is to gather evidence. Five is your beneficiary input. 6 is to create a compelling title. 7 is to build your case for support, and 8 is when you look for those potential funders. So let's have a look at these in more detail. So as we've said, you need to start by identifying your core costs. What are those essential expenses that you're struggling to fund? What would be the impact of not covering those costs? So it goes back to those things, those 3 strategies that we were talking about earlier that you need to think about. I think this is a good exercise to complete with your accountant or your finance team, whoever it is that helps you pull together your budgets. So then you can get a good understanding of all the costs your organisation occurs over the course of the year. Sometimes you might just get a project budget. You don't always get to see the overall kind of financial budget, and that might help you see where there are core costs that perhaps you could pick up and fold into a project budget that aren't necessarily already in there. Then create a list of all these costs and the amount that's needed, because that will help us for the next stage. Then you can use all the information you've heard today to brainstorm how these costs fit into your projects or could be packaged into their own projects. Sometimes I find that it helps to do this with your team, colleagues outside of your immediate team, or even peers, people that work in the fundraising sector, that you could just, have a chat with about this and see what their take is on it. I always find 2 heads are better than 1, especially when you're coming up with something that can be quite complex. Another example of reframing core costs could be looking at cleaning and maintenance, because again, those aren't sexy costs, are they? But we could describe these as something more funder friendly, something like we're ensuring we're operating in a safe and hygienic environment for vulnerable patients and their families. So this could work, that could work really well if you're working with patients who are having cancer treatment or have long-term illness, sickness. That's a good way to think about packaging up cleaning and maintenance. To make this really compelling, think about why that is important and think about what the outcome would be if that didn't happen. Again, going back to those 3 strategies, if we weren't here, if those core costs weren't needed, what would happen? What would happen to our beneficiaries, the people that we help? You made a great start on this during our pause and reflect exercise. So when you come back to this after the webinar today, you'll have a really good starting point to think about this further, and it will give you a kind of stepping up point. Sometimes putting something down on paper for the first bit is the worst bit. So then, stage 3, we're going to think about the outcomes and impacts of these projects and the activities within them. How will they make a difference for your beneficiaries? What measurable outcomes and outputs can you determine to show the impact of funders' support for your work? So really, again, thinking about those numbers that you can put around it, those stories that you can tell that show the potential funders what your work will do. So you're making sure that you're, again, folding in those core costs into that work to really demonstrate what you're doing. Then you need to gather evidence to back up your project's impact and why your project is needed. Look at those key statistics. Look at the demographics for your beneficiaries. Find case studies and stories that back up what you're trying to say, that go beyond the numbers and demonstrate the difference you'll make to the beneficiaries of your project. It could be that you're talking to a trustee who's been through a similar situation. And if you put in that really good story and that really good case study that demonstrates why those core costs were needed, it might really resonate with them and make them think about the experience they had and maybe things that they hadn't noticed before, and make them understand your projects even better. I think one of the most important points to building a fundable project is to bring your beneficiaries into the process. Use their lived experience to shape the project, and it gives it more authenticity. I know that more and more funders are asking for you to demonstrate how you listen to and include your beneficiaries when you're designing your project. So it's really important to include this step in your process. So we're going to have another power pause. Again, another time to just pause for a second, think about everything that you've just heard, have a little sip of tea. That's what I'm going to do in a minute. And And again, I wanted to give you a key takeaway. So when you're looking back through your notes, you had something tangible to think about. So it's easy when you're trying to think about how your core costs can fit into your projects to forget that the most important tool that you have at your disposal is the stories of those that you help. The story behind your work and the statistics is what truly engages with those funders. You can have the best project in the world, but if you can't make that trust admin resonate with what you're saying through those stories that we all have, that we all work really hard to find, then it just won't work as well. Just have a quick drink. Amazing. So now that you have your impactful project, you need to give it a compelling title that communicates the heart of what you're doing and why it matters. I find that if you have someone in your organization who's fab at doing these, get their input, or if you have a marketing team, if you're lucky enough to have a full marketing team, ask for their support on coming up with a title that helps reframe why those core costs matter to your impact. And also, don't worry about changing that title for every application that you write. This is just a title that you're putting out there for that funder. It doesn't have to be something that you're using internally. It doesn't have to be something that you're going to brand up and put out there. It's something that will resonate with your funder. So sometimes I will take a project title, so say it's something like caring for carers, and then I will kind of put a second project title that just links a bit more with the funder's objectives. So it could be caring for carers, and then helping bereaved carers in our county, or something like that, something that's going to resonate with you, with the funder, and link to your project. So if you come up with a title, don't worry about the fact that it might change when you're looking at a funder per funder basis. That's absolutely fine. And then, as we all know, we need to develop our case for support. I get lots of questions about cases for support and how best to use them. For me, my case for support is an absolute internal document that I wouldn't send out anywhere else. It's a document that I would use to pull together all the information that I need on a project, so that when I see an opportunity to apply, I don't have to keep going back to our service delivery team, our accountant, our finance team, marketing team, to try and pull together information. I have everything at my fingertips that I need to just be able to get on and put that application in. We know sometimes how short deadlines that we have to work to, or that suddenly a trust announces that they're going to close. So you need to be able to have all that information at your fingertips. It just makes it so much easier. So for me, case for support should clearly outline the problem, your solution to that problem, the objectives, outputs and outcomes, as well as the impact you'll deliver with a funder's support. Include those core cost elements, making sure to weave them into your narrative and demonstrating why they're an essential part of your project. You also need to include your project's budget, and then again, taking the opportunity to add in all those perceived core costs that you've now identified fit perfectly and strategically into your project. List them like you would any other cost, and again, use your narrative to show why these elements are so essential to obtaining your impactful outcomes. And the other question I get asked a lot is, do I need a case for support for each project? I would say yes. I find these documents so useful, and if you have other members of your team as well that work on trust applications, having one unified document really helps you all to be sounding like you're talking on behalf of the organisation. You're using your brand voice, but also if you're using volunteers to pull together your trust applications, I know that's something that's increasingly happening as well, to just take the pressure off the workload. Again, you'll all sound like you're saying the same things, you're from the same organisation. But God forbid anything that should happen to you, if anybody needs to pick up your work, you have this clearly defined document that is ready to go, that has everything that you've spent so much time and effort putting together, and someone can easily pick up on that and help keep things going while you're away. So finally, I know this might seem strange to do this last, but I find that this is the best way, is to identify your potential trust funders, because once you know your project's priorities, you can know whether those priorities are going to align with a project's with a potential funder's priorities. So your activities and outcomes match the priorities of your potential funder. If you do it the other way round, it sometimes feels like you're trying to develop a project to fit a funder's priorities, but you need to demonstrate that you're an expert in this arena. Funders will be able to know whether you're an expert or not. They'll be able to look at your organisation's websites if you're keeping them up to date, social media, again, if you're keeping them up to date, and see you know what you're talking about. So develop a project just so it fits a potential funder really, really won't work. That's why looking for funders afterwards is the best way, once you absolutely know what you're trying to look for. It ensures that your project is not only fundable, but is also rooted in the real needs of your organisation and the people and beneficiaries that you're helping. And that will make it far more compelling and impactful for trust funders, because that passion and impactfulness will come across. So, another power pause for us to quickly just take a breather, let our brains take in everything that we've just heard, and another key point for you to take away and look at later. So a truly fundable project isn't just about what you need, it's about the change you'll create. Funders want to see a clear, compelling link between the resources you're requesting and the real world difference their funding will make. So the key: shift your focus from expenses to impact. Instead of saying we need £30,000 for staff salaries, say with £30,000 we can provide essential support to 150 individuals, ensuring they receive the care and services they need to improve their quality of life. The strongest projects, the ones that get funded, have a clear problem, solution and measurable outcomes. Funders should be able to see exactly how their support will drive meaningful change. So what's next? You have a strategy to incorporate your core projects into some fundable projects, and you have the steps to create that project. You've found some trust funders you'd like to apply to, but how do you make sure your application is going to stand out in this increasingly competitive environment? On the screen, you'll see some key strategies to think about, which will help strengthen your proposals and increase their chances of success. Please don't use a scattergun approach. Personalise each application you submit. I know sometimes it can be really tempting, but I read an article today, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I've shared it there, that it's all about quality over quantity. Please avoid generic copy and paste applications. Each one needs to be tailored to the specific funder. Use their language throughout. Reflect that you've done that research. You've spent ages doing all of this research, so reflect that in your application by using their language. Make sure that you talk about their priorities, and that will really form the basis of your application. Demonstrate how you fit those funding priorities and the impact your project will have with their support. So we've talked about evidence and data. Potential funders really want to see that your project is backed up by real need. Use statistics from within your own organisation to demonstrate demand or need. So, for example, 85% of our beneficiaries say they struggle to find support elsewhere. Are you putting surveys out there? Are you asking your support groups for feedback that you can then use in your application? If it's relevant and it helps back up your point, use external research or national data to strengthen your messaging. So recently talking about carers again, I've used some carers information that says, 85% of carers struggle with their mental health. And although that's not necessarily in the county that I'm looking for, it really helps build that picture that there's a national struggle there for carers. So if that helps demonstrate the need and strengthen your messaging, don't worry about using national statistics and then boiling that down into what's going on your local level, because that just shows what's going on. You have that expertise in that particular area to know what's happening. We've already touched on this in our power pause, but it's so vital. I really think it's worth saying again. Tell those compelling stories. Those facts and figures that we just talked about are really, really important, but stories bring your project to life. They put the funder in the beneficiary's shoes or make them remember a time when they or a loved one may have needed your support. So again, it's about that connection. It's about demonstrating that these core costs that they, you know, if they were sitting in a waiting room in a hospice, for example, they might not notice some of these things have been going on when they came there to get support for their loved one, but actually you can build that picture and show the behind the scenes of what happened to support their loved one in that time. If you can obtain their permission, use those real life examples to illustrate the human impact of your work. So instead of saying we provide mental health support, share a short story about an individual or family who found hope and strength through your organisation's services, illustrating the tangible difference that your work makes. And again, this links to focusing on outcomes, not just outputs and activities. Many applications fall into the trap of listing what they will do. Will provide 150 workshops, rather than the difference that those workshops will make. How many people will that help? How will it improve their mental health? How will it improve the skills that they have to have a brighter future? Think about change to demonstrate impact. How will your beneficiaries be better off because of your project? So again, an example, we provide 50 hours of mental health counselling. It sounds okay, but it doesn't really tell you anything. But you can reframe it to emphasise the outcome. With 50 hours of mental health support, individuals will gain the support they need to build resilience and manage their mental health, enabling them to lead more fulfilling lives. And then build relationships with funders. This goes back to that quality over quantity we were talking about earlier. Trust fundraising isn't just about the applications anymore. 20 years ago when I first started, it absolutely was. Hardly anyone would ever pick up the phone and talk to a potential funder, or if you did, you would be gatekept by the solicitor or accountant that was looking after it. But now it's about building those relationships, and it's becoming more and more crucial as trust fundraising becomes so much more competitive. If a trust doesn't explicitly say you can't contact them, pick up the phone or send them an email to clarify information or ask any questions you can't readily find the answer to. Follow trusts on their social media, go to their Q&A sessions, those Meet the Funder webinars, ask your questions and let them know about your project where you can. LinkedIn is another great place to go and find information. Lots more trusts and foundations are using LinkedIn. You can use LinkedIn to demonstrate what your organisation is up to and how you are vital. You can share the impact there. So if they're looking for clarification of what you've written in your application, they'll be able to find it. That's why you should make sure that your website's up to date and that along with your social media platforms, it's talking about your projects, talking about the need, because we're all very good at saying, oh, we've done this great workshop and it ran so well. And that's amazing. But it can often make it feel like your organisation doesn't need the support that you actually do need. So you need to talk about that need as well, along with the impact. So again, if a funder is doing their own research, you have some great compelling information for them to find. So another quick power pause. This time, I want to refocus on making sure you tailor your proposals to each funder's specific priorities. I know I've said this quite a lot, but I think it's really, really important. When we get busier, it's easy to slip into, I'll just get this one out, I'll just do this one. But actually, generic applications don't work. Always show how your project directly supports the potential funder's mission, goals and priorities. You've done all that amazing research. Reflect that research and their language that you found through that research in your application. It's becoming increasingly important. So we're nearing the end now. So thank you so much for coming this far with me. I just wanted to go through some key takeaways that you can think about when you come back to look through your notes, when you come back to watch this webinar again. I know that rethinking core costs can feel like a big shift. In trust fundraising, we haven't really included core costs in what we're doing. You know, it wasn't a thing. Core costs usually got through different things, you know, legacy giving, individual giving. That was always the place to go for core costs. But I know trust fundraisers are being asked to find this now because other income streams are also becoming increasingly competitive. So this is a good time to rethink how we feel and think about core costs. You don't have to change what you do, it's just how you communicate it. So here are 5 key takeaways to help you put all of this into practice and start turning core costs into fundable projects as soon as you leave this webinar if you wanted to. Reframing core costs into fundable projects isn't about altering what you do. It's about communicating it in a different way that funders can engage with. Instead of presenting rent, salaries, or operational costs as standalone expenses, link them directly to the impact they enable. A project-based approach helps funders see how their support leads to real, measurable outcomes. Many funders hesitate to cover core costs because they don't see the direct impact. Your job is to connect those dots. So instead of saying we need funding for staff salaries, explain how those salaries ensure high quality care, expert support and life-changing interventions. We couldn't do it without our staff. Frame your ask around the difference this investment makes to people or your beneficiaries' lives. Again, a powerful way to reframe core costs is to ask, what would happen if our service disappeared? If funders understand the gap your organisation feels, the consequences of losing that support, they're more likely to fund it. Again, a cost per head approach helps make your fundraising request more tangible and adaptable. If it costs £85 per person to deliver a project, and you can tailor that ask up and down depending on the funder's funding envelope, this flexibility allows you to align with different funders' giving levels without compromising the integrity of your work. And you can really slip those core costs under the radar. You don't need to overhaul your entire approach overnight. One small start, one small thought about a core cost, reframe it into a project and test how it fits in your next funding application. Over time, embedding this mindset across your organisation will make fundraising for core costs feel more natural and effective. So our last pause and reflect before we finish today. I'm going to give you 3 quick takeaways as well after this, and then we'll have a quick Q&A if you all have time. So I want you, from what we've learned today, to think about what one key shift in your thinking about core costs. Maybe it's realizing that funders can support core costs when it's framed correctly, or perhaps it's understanding the importance of language, moving from admin costs to essential infrastructure. I want you to write down your biggest takeaway in a single sentence. This is going to be your fundraising mind shift, something to take forward into your work. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to let you think about that, or maybe a couple of seconds as we're coming up to 1 o'clock, and I don't want to make anybody late for anything that they're going on to next. But I think it's really about giving yourself permission to think about core costs differently, thinking about doing this a different way. We've always been like, nope, can't fund core costs, nope, that's not us. Trust preferred projects, but actually looking at it in this way, and it does take a mind shift. There is a way that you can incorporate these core costs into your projects and just think about them differently. And sometimes that's all it takes, isn't it? A kind of mind shift with what we're doing. So let's have a look at some quick wins. These are 3 things that you could do now, next, tomorrow, in a month, that just help break it down into some small manageable steps that I hope will set you up for success. So the first one is what we started in our pause and reflect right at the beginning. Pick one core cost, something essential but tricky to fund: staff training, utilities. Instead of presenting it as an expense, think about the outcome that it enables. This small shift in language makes a real difference. So again, you could do this at the end of the week. This could be your Friday thing to do, is take one core cost and think about how you could fit that into a project, or does it need to be a project on its own? And use that as a starting point to think about how you can reframe it. Then craft your first compelling title. Once you've reframed your core cost, give it a name that reflects its impact. Put it out there on your social medias with your peers, and put it on your LinkedIn to ask for suggestions, get other people involved. Funders connect with outcomes and not overheads, so keep it short, clear and inspiring. Instead of volunteer coordination, you might say empowering a compassionate volunteer network to support patients and their families. And then build a simple case for support. You don't have to do a full case for support right away. Sometimes just putting it all down in a one-page summary. What's the challenge? How does your project solve it? What difference will it make to the people you support? It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. Just get the key points down so you have something to build from, and it captures everything that's now swimming around in your head about how you're going to reframe all these amazing core costs into fantastic projects. So that's it from me. Unless everybody has any questions, any burning questions that they'd like to ask about things that you've heard. I know sometimes you need to go away and think about everything that you've just heard. So the very last slide I'm going to show you just has some contact details on it. You all have my email address. So if you have one of those in the shower moments and you think about something that you wish you'd asked, please do drop me an email. It's not a problem at all. Or if you connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message via LinkedIn, and we can pick up and connect. But if anybody does have any questions they'd like to go through now, I'd be delighted to try and answer them for you. If anyone would like to put it in the chat, or I don't think there's anything in the chat. I'm just going to check. I've just realised I didn't check the whole way through.
Hi, I've got a question.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi. This has been so helpful. Thank you.
I'm so glad.
And I have been thinking about direct staff costs as kind of not core costs and framing them in similar ways to you've done. Amazing. So I'm glad that I've made a start, but there's some other things I'm thinking about which is really helpful. One thing I'm wondering is with budgets, obviously you're putting kind of the direct costs, but often you're putting admin staff or whatever you're putting in the budget. Would it be better to rewrite the budget in using some of the terms you've used in the text of the application? So say, I don't know, essential support staff or something like that.
Absolutely. And I find I do that anyway. You know, I will have the budget for the basics of the project, and then when I'm looking at a particular funder, if there's something that language that they use, I'll reframe those costs. They're exactly the same cost, but I would put essential support staff, or we didn't use the word admin, but yes, I would absolutely do that. If it was something where they say, oh, I want to do welcome packages, you would build everything up, so it would, here's the welcome package bundle of projects. Absolutely, I would definitely do that. Just because your accountant or your finance team give you that budget doesn't mean we can't mess around with it a little bit.
I mean, I do to an extent, but I probably could make it more exciting. Also, a lot of funders say we don't support core costs. Is it ballsy to go, well, I've got a project?
I think if you're framing those core costs as project costs, then they're not core costs anymore. They're project costs.
Yeah.
So I think some people do think that kind of, core costs, oh God, I've got to stay away from that, can't possibly do this. But actually, if you are a bit ballsy, like you say, and just put it in there, actually you can frame them as the project costs. That's exactly what you're doing. So
what you've been saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Amazing. Has anybody else got anything before we wrap up for today? I'm conscious that we're a little over time because of the trying to get everything sorted. Here is some contact details. My LinkedIn is there if anybody wants it. as well. Please do join with me. I try and post motivational things to keep us trust fundraisers going, but also if I see any opportunities for Meet the Funders or any trust application opportunities, deadlines, I try and post those on there as well. If you're not already part of our Trust Fundraising Hub, please do come along on Facebook. It's a really, really helpful group and a great place to post some of these ideas that we've heard today, get some opinions about those titles and things like that. You can look at Monetary Fundraising's LinkedIn as well to see some of the things that we're up to there. And every month I do a Let's Chat Trust Fundraising live session with lovely people like you that come along and support each other. The next one is on the 23rd of September at 12 noon. And I'd love to see you come along to that and share your thoughts and insights with your peers and colleagues as well. You can find out how to join up for that. It's totally free on our Monetary Fundraising page. So thank you so much, everyone.